Have you ever been told a story as a child that you didn't believe, but it still moved you in your soul? It gave you so much fear. I know I did. But what if those stories weren't just stories? What if they were a preparation to live in a real place, a thin place?
What's that? You want to be scared? Come with me. You will experience tales of horror, ghosts, and death. It is not recommended for the weak at heart. Listen in the dark. It's more fun that way. This is Weekly Spooky.
Hello, my spookies. It's Wednesday, and you know what that means. It's time for a little spooky in your weekly. I'm your host and narrator, Enrique Couto, and I cannot wait to bring you this pure piece of terror. I love folklore. But as an American who lives in Ohio, which is the setting of tonight's story, I'm not familiar with the rest of the world's legends and folklore, not as much as I'd like. But this week we have a great tale of Irish folklore from the perspective of a young man begrudgingly in Ohio. But before we get to that, I want to thank you so much for listening to the show and enjoying the spooky all year round. We're here every single week, over 190 episodes worth of scary content. And if you love it, make sure you're subscribed on your favorite podcasting app so you never miss a single episode. And if you want to support us in an even bigger way without spending a single penny, leave us a 5-star rating, especially on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, because that is where people go to find brand new shows. And when they see how much you're enjoying it, I'm sure they'll want to join in on the spooky good time. And if you want to get involved in the Weekly Spooky community, we're on Facebook. Just search Weekly Spooky's Tomb of Terror. It's a place where the authors, the listeners, and myself all hang out, share memes, and scare each other. And of course, if you want to support us in the most direct way humanly possible, and maybe subhumanly possible, you can go to weeklyspooky.com and click on Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you get all kinds of bonus content, including an extra spooky every month. But now, my friends, it's about time we head to the story. So get ready after these quick words. The Thin Place by David O'Hanlon. For every action, there's a reaction. My family's Irish, so it's usually an overreaction. That's how this story really starts. Dad ran away with another woman, and Mom set his car on fire, broke the new girl's nose, and knocked Dad's front teeth out. They were too big for his mouth anyway. She got 6 months in county lockup for that. While she was gone, I was sent to stay with her parents. I loved my grandparents, but 6 months in Ohio? What was I going to do? A 16-year-old boy has no business in Ohio. At the time, I thought it was going to be the death of me. It almost was, and in retrospect, was much worse. My grandparents were from the old country, which probably explains a lot. Gramps was a soldier, just not in a formal army. At the time, I didn't know exactly what that meant. During the summer months, he would take me shooting and horseback riding while singing Tioki Garla. We camped and practiced building fires and shelters. He showed me how to make snares and to fish with bare essentials. He was kind of crazy in hindsight. Grandma was a pavi. That's a kind of gypsy if you want to be a dick about it. At night, she would scare the hell out of me with stories of the slaw and the doulahan. Then we'd set out cream and cookies for the puka, who she swore groomed the dog and kept the rabbits out of her garden. Every morning I woke up and found the plate clean and the saucer empty. 16 was far too old to believe in such things, but the decapitated bunny in the garden certainly made me wonder. Eating the cookies was understandable, but Grandma might have been trying a bit too hard to sell her fairy tales when she got to animal mutilation. At the time, I knew they were both a little nuts, but when you're 16, you know everything until someone comes along to show you just how wrong you really are. It's that kind of story. It was fall, 1992, and my mom was getting out soon. With only a couple more weeks in the purgatory of Ohio, I wanted to do something fun. But it was Ohio, and that was impossible. I decided to go camping in the woods adjacent to their property for the night instead. Grandma protested, but luckily Gramps had my back. He insisted it helped me become a man and made sure I packed accordingly. Then Grandma stuffed another 20 pounds of junk I didn't need into my backpack. She even put in 3 changes of clothes and a horseshoe. Yeah, a horseshoe. It was one night, but she acted like it was an epic quest to Mordor. She also gave me cookies for the puka, so he would keep me out of trouble. Like any camper should be, I was aware of my basic needs. I set up my tent first and then built a fire pit so the flames wouldn't spread to refuse on the forest floor. I needed food, and I wanted to catch something the way my Gramps had taught me. I set a couple of snares for birds and squirrels in the low branches of a nearby tree, and one simple figure 4 trap on the ground. I baited them all with cookie crumbs, which were all that remained of Puka's cookies. Fairy creatures be damned, Grandma's peanut butter cookies were not getting wasted, on my watch at least. The night had turned cooler than I had anticipated. I should have checked the Weather Channel, but preoccupied myself with making sure my collection of Hustler and jugs were properly hidden, so I laid there on my camping pad, freezing my balls off and wishing I had another cookie. My traps hadn't turned up anything. That was probably because the woods were abandoned by all intelligent life. Sadly, teenagers and intelligent life are mutually exclusive things. It was nearing midnight when I heard the snap of the rocks crashing together. Something had tripped my figure 4, and I rushed to find out what it was. The stones were pressed flat against one another, and I expected to find a paper-thin ground squirrel flattened between them. I might have chosen a topstone that was too heavy, but I wanted to make sure I killed it cleanly. That was Gramps' #1 rule. You never caused undue suffering to anything, especially not something that would feed and keep you alive. I hefted the stone and tossed it to the side to reveal not one single solitary damn thing. Whatever set it off must have been extremely agile, since the stone only needed to fall 5 inches. I looked around for tracks but couldn't make sense of the ones I found. They were deep and long, something short and chubby with bare feet and 5 bizarre clawed toes. I should have packed up my gear and gone home, but that wouldn't be a very good story. I marked the heel of the footprint with a twig and then repeated the process like Gramps taught me. After marking a few, I knew the creature's stride and was able to track it with relative ease. My flashlight was a grungy plastic one from Gramps' tool shed, and I hadn't bothered checking the batteries. The dim yellow cone stretched out in front of me no more than 10 feet, but it was enough to get by on. I followed the trail for the better part of 30 minutes before coming to an old train bridge. Between the iron beams were rotten ties and loose gravel. Moss and wild grasses poked up through the little rocks. The flashlight gave me a drab vision of the bridge adorned with graffiti and tangled ivy. It stretched over a narrow but seemingly bottomless chasm. There were words written in stylistic letters in colorful explosions across the iron joists. Faded on one of the uprights, in the simplest letters, were 2 words I remember from a fairy tale, but couldn't quite place. Kulate. Lights danced in the woods and stole my attention. My grandma's crazy superstitions flashed forward from my memory. Fairy fire? Then I heard the giggles of girls and a celebratory cheer from one of them. Might be an angry fairy leading me to my doom. But it might be horny schoolgirls. I decided to take my chances and sprinted towards the lights, completely forgetting about the animal I was tracking. I could have sworn I heard a tisking behind me, but there were potential boobs in those deep, dark woods. I continued running until the damn flashlight began flickering. I slid to a stop and looked for the lights, finding them a few yards to the left and about 100 in front of me. I closed an eye to get it adjusted to the dark before the light went out, which was sure to happen. And it did. I continued following the girls when their lights cut off one after the other. I tried to keep my bearings and headed towards the point where they went dark. It didn't take long before I noticed a new light source. A pale glow grinning through the claw-like limbs of the shadowy trees. I kept my pace steady, but slow enough that I wouldn't slip down a hill or get impaled on a branch. The woods slowly parted, and there I saw a simple cabin. Something vaguely resembling music pulsed from inside, but I was too far away for it to be more than just thumping bass. The rhythm seemed nice, though. I stumbled over a dead branch and crept up the stairs. I stood in front of the door with my fist raised to knock. I could hear the music clearer now. It was some new pop tune that I remembered from the car ride from Tennessee. I couldn't recall the name, and it didn't really matter. A couple of the girls were carrying on, and then I heard a deeper laugh. I lowered my hand and decided to try my luck in the woods. Then I remembered the words on the bridge and the strange footprints I had followed to it. I raised my fist to knock one more time when the steps behind me creaked, and then my face hit the hardwood of the door. "Who the hell are you?" The tone was gruff, but the voice had the slight squeak of someone who hit puberty late. Richard Spangler." The door was rough and the splinters pricked my cheek when I spoke. The vice-like grip on the back of my neck loosened, and I was spun around. A stocky brute with a face fit for a Noxzema commercial greeted me. He pointed an accusatory finger at me. "Weird kid?" I pointed back and smiled. "Asshole from the gas station?" He straightened his greasy Sohio shirt over his man boobs. "It's Goran." "Yeah, I can read it right there on your shirt. That's the kind of convenience I expect from Standard Oil." "What do you want?" Goran was a linebacker with a future in mall security, but I wasn't particularly interested in walking through the dark woods with a permanent wedgie, so I decided to be nice. "I was camping, and my flashlight died. I saw the lights heading this way and decided to see if you guys could spare some batteries. Doubt there's any here, but you can come in, I guess." He moved me aside and opened the door with a gesture for me to enter. He gave me a hard shove as I did, so that I stumbled through the threshold. "Thanks, Goran. I don't think I could have made it on my own." "Hey guys, Dick Spanker is here." I sighed. Of all the wrongs my father had committed against me, none was more grievous than the name he gave me. I hope he choked on the teeth my mom knocked out. "You know, I've heard that name since 5th grade. You know you're going to hear it for the rest of your life." "Fair point, Gonad." Goran's smile fell a little. He looked like he might hit me when a female voice shrieked and made us both jump. "Rich! Goran, be nice! Rich is the only reason I'm not turning 18 in the 10th grade." Haley Burke ran over and gave me a hug that probably counted as the best sex I would have for another decade. I scuffed my toe against the door and tried to divert my eyes from her tits. "Hi, Haley. Nice place. Is this your cabin?" "Oh, God, no. We found it. This place is totes grody, and there's dead animals everywhere." I hadn't noticed them before, but sure as shit, the entire place was decorated with mounted heads, stuffed varmints, and a few ducks hung on plaques. A dusty black bear sprawled out in front of a cold fireplace. "Found? Isn't that called breaking and entering?" "Of course not, Spanker. The door was unlocked." Goran informed me as he headed to an adjacent room. His stupidity made my eyes roll on their own. That makes it much less illegal. So anyway, I was camping and my flashlight... Wow, you guys must really be desperate to set Mel up if you brought Spanker along, a new voice said. I smiled at Haley. And where there's an asshole, there's usually a dick just 2 inches away. I turned to see the star of the football team leaning against a door jamb with Goran right over his shoulder. Yep, I was right. How are you, Todd? Melanie Hackney shoved past them and flashed what might have been a smile in my direction. She wasn't the future centerfold that Haley was, but she was definitely cute, and the tight Cleveland Browns t-shirt indicated she was also freezing and braless. She made her way to the fireplace and picked up one of the logs next to it, but it fell apart in her hands. Goran, I thought you were going to get wood. She kept her eyes to the floor when she spoke, which seemed odd since she hung out with the 2 most popular girls in the school. I did, as soon as you bent over, he snorted. I heard that, retard, his girlfriend said from the other room. Rachel, the deep throat Sloat, was gorgeous in a maybe it's Maybelline sort of way. Rumor had it that her maternal line had serviced just about every man and many of the women in the county for 4 generations. For some reason, I never got my turn, though once her grandma did invite me over for lemonade and pie. In retrospect, I don't think she meant pecan. That's off subject, however. Todd, why don't you take Goran outside and make sure he does it right this time? Mel's right, it's getting cold in here. Haley waved her hands for them to leave like she was shooing flies from her parfait. As soon as they were gone, Rachel sauntered in and kicked the door shut behind them. She flopped onto the couch in a cloud of dust and bent over, hacking. I got a quick peek down her blouse, so the walk wasn't for nothing. Haley tapped my shoulder. So, Rich, what are you doing out here? Oh, right, I was camping nearby. I went for a walk and my flashlight ran out of batteries. I don't suppose you have any. I think they're AA's. We can look around here, but everything's so old, I doubt it. Todd had to bring up gas for the generator because the stuff in there was gross and wouldn't work. This place is positively ancient. Rachel huffed. I might have some batteries. Mel, hand me my purse, would you? Melanie looked around and spotted it on the mantel above the fireplace. She tossed it to Rachel, who dug through it and pulled out a purple vibrator. Everyone stared at her for a moment. What? It's not like Goran's going to do me any good. She unscrewed the bottom and dropped the 2 batteries into her palm. With all the shit the coach has him taking, his dick looks like a shriveled thumb, and he's getting tits. Will 2 be enough? I tried to remember what words were, as the thought about the pocket rocket's many adventures ran through my head. I'm not sure. I took the top off the light and found 2 dead batteries. Looks like that's just what I need, but I couldn't. I mean, you need them for, little dicks and all. I'm gonna stop talking. Rachel giggled. It was high and melodious. Definitely the one I heard in the woods. I can just get hands-on tonight, I guess. She nibbled her bottom lip and laughed again as I squirmed in place. You did help me pass geometry, so it's the least I can do. And history. I reached out for the batteries. She let her nails drag against my wrist as she set them in my hand. That's a good point. Maybe we should lock Goran out. She winked, and I made an inarticulate sound that might have been an agreement. If you're through giving Richard blue balls, would anyone care to tell me what that noise is? Melanie asked as she pulled back a tattered curtain. We all listened, and sure enough, there was a noise. Haley turned off the boombox to make it easier for us. The staccato thumps seemed to be getting closer, and then further away, faster and faster, like something circling the cabin. An animal called out in the darkness. Was that a horse? Melanie pressed her hands against the glass to shield against the light and stared into the woods. That definitely sounded like a horse to me. I always wanted my own horse. Haley clapped excitedly. If it's wild, I can keep it, right? And how are you going to catch a wild horse, Haley? Rachel made a good point. I don't know, Deep Throat. Maybe you can show it your tits. That usually works. It did on your brother. She sucked a finger slowly and made a pop. Then she pulled past her bright red lips. He's married, you whore. I know. She was there, you uppity bitch. As much as I really wanted to hear more, I called for them to quiet down. Something was extremely wrong with the situation, and I needed blood getting back to my brain if I was going to figure it out. We're in a cabin that none of us own. We don't know who the owner is, and someone is circling us on a horse. None of this sounds like a good thing, ladies. I put the batteries in the flashlight and tested it out. It worked, but was dimmer than before. Apparently, Rachel used her battery-operated boyfriend more than her real one. The hoofbeats stopped, and we stood in silence for a long moment. Melanie leaned against the window harder. Guys, I think we should leave. Something is happening out there. In the trees. I'm not sure, I can't see. Haley smiled and sighed. Because there's nothing to see. It was just animals doing, well, animal stuff. Probably just Then the window exploded inward. Weekly Spooky will be right back after these quick messages. Melanie's scream equaled the sound of the shattering window. She stumbled back and fell to the floor. I hurdled the object that crashed through and knelt beside her. Small cuts adorned an otherwise perfect complexion. I tried to check them for glass when the other girls started screaming. I turned and noticed the object on the floor. A mop of blonde hair with bloody tips hung over the angular cheekbones. Everything that was supposed to be below those cheekbones, specifically Todd's entire body, were missing. Haley's scream continued unbroken. Rachel sprang over the couch and ran for the door. It flew open, laying her out flat as it connected with her face. Goran slammed the door shut and leaned his bulk against it. Sweat rolled like wild rivers between the pimples. He took deep, heaving breaths and looked around the cabin for something, though he didn't bother telling us what it was. Goran turned and searched the door for a lock, but there wasn't one. Just 2 empty brackets where a board was supposed to go. Goran couldn't figure that out and ran over to me. He grabbed my shirt and shook me around. We have to get the fuck out of here, Spanker! I slapped him like the hysterical chick in a generic disaster movie. Todd was just outside, and that did not work out well for him. I pointed at the disembodied head. His eyes followed my finger, and then he puked across the dusty floorboards. The orange-brown spew spattered my gray all-stars, and I slapped him again. Pull yourself together. We can't just run outside. We need a plan. I have one. Whoever's out there will be too busy killing the rest of you to get me. Goran snatched the flashlight out of my hand and ran for the door. You don't want to do that, Goran. That flashlight... He ran outside and left the door wide open again. Never mind. Have fun, asshole. I slammed the door. The board to lock it was lying on the floor, and it took me less than a second to decide what to do. I dropped the board into place and checked on Rachel, who, aside from a small dent in her forehead, seemed okay. Melanie helped me get her to the couch. 2 of the girls were bleeding, one of them unconscious, and Haley was hyperventilating from all the screaming. I checked Melanie's cuts and wiped away the blood. We really need to get something over these. I picked up Rachel's purse and found a package of tissue. I handed them to Mel, who went to the bathroom to clean up better. Haley, I need you to come over here and sit with Rachel. I can't. She pointed in the general direction of the head without looking. Right. Okay, I got this. I rolled the bearskin rug up around the head and dumped the whole thing out of the broken window. I saw my flashlight beam bouncing through the wilderness. It flickered, went out, and came on briefly again, but then died. Serves you right, Gonad. I went into the other room, which barely counted as a kitchen, and found the girls' flashlights next to a cooler of Schlitz. I stuck the lights into the waist of my jeans and grabbed 3 cans. I handed one to Haley, hoping it would calm her down some. Her hands shook so much that the malt liquor sprayed against the ceiling when she finally got it open. She didn't seem to mind as she slugged it down. Mel came out of the bathroom with pieces of tissue stuck to her face like she had just shaved for the first time. I snickered at the sight. She scowled, and then a little laugh escaped. "You have no room to laugh, Dick Spanker." She sat on the arm of the couch and used a fistful of tissue to wipe the blood from Rachel's forehead. "He got her pretty good. Who's out there, you think?" She took one of the cans from my hand, cracked it open, and enjoyed a long pull before pressing the cold can against Rachel's rising goose egg. "Probably the owner of the house." It was the best I could come up with. "Decapitating people seems like an overreaction to trespassing. Where is the—" She gagged slightly and waved a hand at the dust-free spot the rug had occupied. I tossed it. And overreaction or not, this situation is happening. We can go back to my camp and then on to my grandparents' house. We have lights now. I gestured to the ones in my jeans. "You actually want to go out there?" "Gramps taught me a lot about moving in the woods, even at night. We can get back to my camp in 15, maybe 20 minutes. I remember the way. It's only a half-hour's walk to the house from there." Goran was heading the opposite direction, and I'm sure whoever was out there is chasing him. It was kind of his plan. I'm sure he won't mind us using it. We just need to wake her up first. "I guess it's better than sitting here." Mel stroked Rachel's hair and whispered for her to wake up. Haley slapped the sleeping girl across the face hard enough that I jumped. She jerked her friend up by the collar and screamed for her to wake up. It seemed to be working. Rachel's eyes slowly opened and rolled around until they were both forward and semi-focused. "There, she's awake. Let's go." Haley let go of Rachel and the girl flopped back down. "Fuck. We can come back for her. Let's go, Rich." Haley came over and pulled one of the lights from my jeans. "Now." Mel was helping Rachel sit up and shook her head. "She can't run like this. Walking, maybe. Then she can catch up." Haley threw open the door and walked off the porch before stopping. She stomped a foot and growled in frustration. "Which way am I supposed to go?" I pointed and then went to help Melanie lift Rachel. She staggered between us but found her balance and walked as best she could manage. We got outside without incident. Haley was ahead of us, making slow progress since she didn't have a clue where to go. We stumbled along for 15 minutes or so before Rachel came around enough to walk on her own. By that time, Haley had slowed down so she didn't have to walk alone. I could smell the burning pine from my campfire and figured we were getting close to the rail bridge. Something was moving, just ahead of us. I whispered for everyone to turn off their lights and stalked forward on my own. A sleek mountain of muscles stood next to the tracks. Its hellish breath steamed in the cool air. The riderless stallion paced back and forth, occasionally snorting at the rails. An obsidian saddle sat on its back over an onyx blanket. Layers of darkness melting and swirling together to create a living shadow in the magnesium beams of the moon. Things were starting to make sense, but not in a sane sort of way. I crept back to the girls. "We need to run really fast and get over the railroad tracks. I think we'll be okay after that. There's a really big horse up there, though. And no, you don't want to keep it, Haley." She opened her mouth to speak, but the only thing that came out was the metal spike that punched through the back of her head in a spray of blood. She collapsed as the weapon jerked free, grating against her even white teeth. The spiked end dripped her life on the leaf litter, while the axe head on the other side gleamed brightly. The owner oozed out of the shadows and wiped the spike on his leather sleeve. My eyes focused on the weapon, crawled up his black sleeve to his shoulder, and then to his empty space. I wasn't sure how to feel about being right. I shouldn't have been right, because it shouldn't have been possible. But the stories my grandma told me echoed in the back of my mind as soon as I saw the horse. Unfortunately, none of those stories told me what to do about a Doulahan. So I improvised. "Run!" I screamed before kicking him in the balls. Apparently his head was the only thing he was missing because he doubled over silently from the blow and collapsed to his knees. I sprinted to catch up with Mel and Rachel. Melanie made it over the tracks, but the stallion bit down on Rachel's hair and slung her to the ground. I stopped next to Mel and we watched as the Doulahan came closer. I held onto Mel's arm and shook my head when she tried to run again. I had to see what happened. The creature got to the tracks and stopped. I was right again. He couldn't cross the iron. He stretched out his axe, and golden sparks crackled as it hit the air above the rail. He turned and scooped Rachel up on his shoulder before pushing her over the horse's haunches. As he slid into the saddle, I saw the head hanging from his belt. His head. It was molted, and the stump of his neck was gangrenous, but the eyes were bright as they stared at me. A wicked smile stretched across his face as he rode away with his prize. Melanie and I made it back to the tent in silence. We sat next to the fire with a death grip on each other. She cried quietly. I tapped my toe nervously. Far away, we heard the boastful neighing of that damn horse. Then I remembered something. I sprang up from the ground and dived into the tent for my backpack. Gramps hadn't sent me a gun, which would have been nice, but Grandma's horseshoe was a close second. That's the only damn time that sentence will ever make sense. I told Melanie to wait in the tent, and I ran into the abyss to rescue the town tramp. That seems like better motivation than a princess, so I'm not sure why more fairy tales didn't go that way. It definitely worked for me. I found my way back to the cabin quickly. The horse was waiting for me, only it was hooked to a carriage now. The wheel spokes were made of bones, and the candles blazed in the mouths of skulls mounted around the top of the enclosure. The devil horse gnawed on a chubby arm, with the ragged remains of a Sohio shirt sleeve draped over it. Of course the horse is a goddamn carnivore. Why wouldn't it be? Makes all the sense in the world. At least it'll be full after eating Gorin. Probably no room left for me. I don't know why, but I found that comforting at the time. Being brutally murdered by the Headless Horseman I could deal with, but being unceremoniously discarded as road apples seemed a bit too much. Rachel called for me from the window. "Help me, Dick!" Fuck my life. The Doulahan walked around the carriage with axe clutched in his fist. I stared at him and tightened the grip of my horseshoe, realizing I was about to die a virgin. But damn it, I was going to die trying to change that. I charged forward, and the demon unfurled a whip from his belt. It slashed the air in front of me. As it flashed by, I realized it was made from some poor bastard's spine. I dropped onto my ass as it cracked again. The bone weapon slashed the ground beside me, and I rolled to my feet. I held the horseshoe up in an attempt to drive him away. It didn't work. He swung the whip, I ducked, and then the axe whizzed by my face. It stuck into the carriage door, spewing black splinters all over me. I ran around him while he struggled to get free. The bodiless head snarled at me. I threw the horseshoe as hard as I could. The rotting face sank in as the iron shoe shattered the bones. Pus and brain matter sprayed out in a steaming splatter against my shoes. "That's a ringer." The Doulahan flailed about. A thick, oily smoke oozed from his clothes. The sulphurous fog stung my eyes, and I missed most of the action from then on out. But I could still hear it. For a creature with no vocal cords, he sure could scream. By the time I cleared my eyes, all that was left was a heap of cracked leather clothing lying in a gooey puddle. Rachel and I staggered back to my campsite. The horse, now masterless, didn't bother to pursue us. We looked for it, but it never showed. It didn't even seem to care that its owner melted. Maybe it was just cursed, dragging along for the ride because a headless horseman kind of needs a horse. We got back to my camp and Rachel curled up next to the fire while I went into the tent to check on Mel. I opened the tent and stared, wide-eyed. The fat little thing pulled its bloody head out of her open abdomen. The bulbous nose wiggled above a pointed smile. It waved at me with twisted, broken fingers like they were smashed under a rock. I zipped the tent back up, grabbed Rachel's arm, and ran straight to my room above Gramps' garage. We dated for the remaining 2 weeks I was in Ohio. We knew not to tell anyone about what happened at the cabin. As far as I know, none of the bodies were ever found. Things eventually leveled out for Rachel and me. She ended up writing books about horny monsters, some of which were made into a horrible series of movies about glittery warlocks. I changed my name and became a porn star. Okay, I sell insurance, but I did change that stupid fucking name. Sometimes I wake up at night and swear I hear a carriage coming down the road. Maybe I do. I had been to the collate. That's what the bridge had said. It's the thin place between our world and theirs. I tell my kids the stories my grandmother told me. Only I remember to include the parts about how to kill the monsters. After all, I know they're real. It was a hell of a night, and it changed me forever. But out of everything I saw and learned that night, one lesson will never escape me. Never, ever forget to feed the puka. Now that is quite the Doulahan story, and believe it or not, it's actually the second Doulahan story we've ever had on the show. Morgan Moore had a phenomenal telling of the Doulahan that she did last year, which I highly recommend you check out by looking in our back catalog. It's a good one. I know you'll enjoy it. It's episode 157. But big thank you to David O'Hanlon, the very talented writer of this story, and also the writer of the Babysitter Massacre books, which you can find on Amazon.com. And hey, they're published by me, and the audiobooks are even narrated by me. Go figure. I hope everybody's having a really good week. I got a new washing machine, and it was very frustrating. But all in all, can't complain about life. I hope you're all doing just phenomenally, and I hope you're ready for a whole lot of spooky, because now we're over the hump, halfway to Halloween, baby, and oh boy, is it going to be sweet. So now I think I need to get out of here because I'm prepping our big 200th episode, and believe me, it's going to be awesome. But first, I want to say a big thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters, folks who pay just a little bit more to hear their names read on the show. And they are Bobbletopia.com, Megan Hua, Julia Kirsch, Brent McCullough, Gino Lyons, Steve King, Karen Weemet, Jack Kerr, and Craig Cohen. And remember, if you go to Bobbletopia.com and use code WeeklySpooky at checkout, you get 10% off your purchase, and we get a 10% kickback. So, it's a nice way to support the show, and if you want to hear your name on the end of every episode, just go to weeklyspooky.com, click on Patreon, and select any tier at $15 or higher. It really does help us keep the show going and going and going. But now, my friends, I'm going to get out of here and get back to working on the big 200th episode. So for our executive producer, Rob Fields, our composer, Ray Mattis, and my producing partner, Dan Wilder, we will talk at you very, very soon. And make sure you keep your horseshoe ready.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to find your way back next week. But for now, you are safe. Trust me.